Wyoming Territory, 1875. The lantern flickered through the frosted window of Adam Westfield's cabin, a solitary beacon in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming wilderness. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days, transforming the rugged landscape into a pristine white canvas that stretched to the distant mountains. Inside, Adam sat alone at his rough-hewn table, staring at the small pine tree he'd cut and brought inside, a Christmas tradition he maintained despite having no one to share it with. At 26, Adam had already lived enough hard years to know that the frontier was no place for sentimentality. He'd learned that lesson at 16 when his family's homestead was raided, leaving him the sole survivor. 10 years of driving cattle, breaking horses, and living by his gun had hardened him into a man of few words, so few that folks in the nearest settlement of Pine Creek had taken to calling him the silent cowboy. It wasn't that he couldn't speak. He simply found little worth saying in a world that had taught him that attachment only led to heartbreak. The Christmas tree stood barren in the corner, undecorated save for a single silver star at its top, his mother's, the only possession he'd salvaged from their burned-out cabin. Adam ran his fingers through his dark hair and sighed. What was the point of these traditions when there was no family to share them with, no laughter to fill the spaces between the crackling of the fire? The ranch he'd built was sturdy and successful enough, but terribly empty. "Ain't no use decorating for ghosts," he muttered, his deep voice rough from disuse. Yet something compelled him to rise from his chair, don his sheepskin coat, and step out onto the porch. The cold air bit at his face as he hung the lantern on a post, a habit his father had called lighting the way home. Adam had continued the tradition each Christmas Eve, though he knew no one would come. The frontier had taught him one truth that he held without question: a man survived alone. Connections were dangerous. Love was a luxury that got people killed. Better to be the silent cowboy, respected but distant, than to risk having something precious torn away again. He had his cattle, his horses, and his land. That was enough. It had to be. As he turned to go inside, the wind picked up, driving the snow harder against his face. He squinted into the darkness beyond his property line, where the pines stood like sentinels. For a moment he thought he saw a flicker of movement, perhaps a deer or a wolf. But then it was gone, and he retreated to the warmth of his cabin, unaware that miles away, someone was desperately seeking shelter in the gathering storm. Nora Ramirez pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders as she urged her exhausted mare forward through the blinding snow. At 22, she had thought herself prepared for the journey west, but 3 days of blizzard conditions had proven her woefully mistaken. The stagecoach had left her at the last outpost before the mountain pass closed, with promises that Pine Creek was only a day's ride away. That was before the storm hit. Her golden-brown hair, once neatly pinned beneath her hat, now hung in damp tendrils around her face. Her green traveling dress, fashionable in Boston but utterly inadequate for Wyoming winters, was soaked through. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and she could no longer feel her feet in her leather boots. "Just a little further, Penny," she encouraged her horse, though she had no idea where they were heading. The darkness was absolute, the howling wind disorienting. Her brother's letter had described Pine Creek as a growing settlement with opportunities for a schoolteacher, but now she wondered if she would ever see it or anything else again. The tears that sprang to her eyes froze on her cheeks. She had left everything behind: her comfortable life in Boston, her position as a governess, her suitors, all for the promise of independence and adventure that her brother's letters had painted. Now Thomas was dead, his homestead claim uncertain, and she was lost in a blizzard with night falling fast. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Penny raised her head and nickered softly. Nora blinked through the swirling snow, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. But no, there it was, a light, faint but steady, somewhere ahead. "Thank God," she whispered, allowing hope to flicker back to life. She guided Penny toward the light, praying it wasn't a mirage born of exhaustion and cold. As they drew closer, the outline of a cabin materialized, with a lantern hanging from its porch, its flame dancing in the wind but somehow staying lit. The sight of that light, that promise of warmth and shelter, was the most beautiful thing Nora had ever seen. She urged Penny forward with renewed determination. Whether the cabin's occupants welcomed her or not, she had no choice but to throw herself on their mercy. The alternative was freezing to death in the Wyoming wilderness, and Nora Ramirez had not come all this way to die alone in the snow. Adam was stoking the fire when he heard it, a faint knocking at his door. He froze, poker in hand, certain he had imagined it, but then it came again, weak but undeniable. He set the poker down slowly and reached for the rifle that leaned against the wall. Visitors on Christmas Eve in the middle of a blizzard were unlikely to bring good news. He moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtain. What he saw made him lower his weapon immediately. A horse coated in snow stood trembling before his porch, and clinging to the saddle, barely upright, was a woman, or what looked like a woman beneath layers of snow and ice. Adam yanked the door open, and the wind nearly tore it from his grasp. The woman's face turned toward him, revealing features blue with cold beneath her snow-crusted hat. Her eyes, green as spring grass, registered relief before rolling back as she slumped forward. He caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing shallow. Miss, can you hear me?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Concern had pulled words from him when he often went days without speaking. She didn't respond, and Adam knew he had no time to waste. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him, and laid her gently on the bearskin rug before the fire. Her clothes were soaked through, her hands and face dangerously pale. Years of frontier living had taught him what needed to be done. He worked quickly, removing her wet outer garments while maintaining as much of her dignity as possible. He wrapped her in wool blankets, built up the fire, and put water on to boil. Only then did he return to the porch for her horse. The mare was in bad shape too, covered in ice and trembling violently. Adam led her to the barn, rubbed her down with straw, covered her with a blanket, and gave her feed and water. By the time he returned to the cabin, the woman was stirring beneath the blankets. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her, a cup of hot coffee in his hand. Confusion gave way to alarm as she realized her circumstances, and she clutched the blankets tighter around herself. "Your clothes are drying," Adam said, nodding toward the garments hung near the fire. "You were near frozen through." She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "Thank you, I saw your light. I thought I was going to die out there." Something twisted in Adam's chest, a feeling he couldn't name. He offered her the coffee, helping her sit up enough to sip it. "My name is Nora Ramirez," she said after a moment, some color returning to her cheeks. "I was trying to reach Pine Creek." "You're about 15 miles off course," Adam replied. "I'm Adam Westfield. This is my ranch." He paused, unused to conversation. "The pass to town is closed now. Storm's too bad." Alarm flashed across her face. "How long until it opens?" "Days, maybe a week." He stood, uncomfortable with the fear in her eyes. "You'll be safe here. I can sleep in the barn." "No," the word burst from her with unexpected force. "I mean, please don't leave." "I'm sorry to impose, but I'm still so cold and—" She trailed off, embarrassed by her outburst. Adam nodded once, understanding her fear. A woman alone, lost in the wilderness, then finding herself at the mercy of a stranger, her caution was warranted. "I'll stay," he said simply, "but you need to rest. You've had a close call." As he moved away to give her space, Adam felt oddly unsettled. For years, he'd maintained his solitude with fierce determination, convinced that connections were dangerous liabilities. Yet here was this woman, blown into his life by the same storm that had sealed them together for the foreseeable future. He glanced at the Christmas tree in the corner, still bare except for his mother's star, and then at Nora, who had already drifted back to sleep. The lantern he'd lit out of habit, a gesture toward a past he couldn't reclaim, had drawn her to his door like a moth to flame. Adam didn't believe in signs or providence. But as he settled into his chair to keep watch over his unexpected guest, he couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had sent Nora Ramirez to his door on Christmas Eve, of all nights. Nora awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was back in Boston, that her journey west had been nothing but a dream. Then the unfamiliar weight of rough wool blankets registered, along with the crackle of a wood fire, and memory came flooding back. She sat up carefully, relieved to find herself dressed in her chemise and petticoat, though her outer garments were still draped near the fire. The cabin was small but neat, with a main room that served as kitchen, dining, and living area, and what appeared to be a single bedroom through a half-open door. Morning light filtered through frosted windows, revealing the continuing snowfall outside. Adam Westfield stood at the cast-iron stove, his back to her. He was taller than she'd realized the night before, broad-shouldered but lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to doing for himself. "Good morning," she ventured, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. He turned, and Nora was struck by how young he was, perhaps only a few years older than herself. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard and eyes the color of a summer storm. "You're awake," he said, as if surprised. "How do you feel?" "Better, thank you." She glanced toward the window. "The storm hasn't let up." Adam shook his head. "Got worse overnight. Your horse is fine in the barn, fed and watered." He hesitated, then added, "Your clothes should be dry now if you want to dress." "I can step outside." Nora nodded gratefully. "I would appreciate that." Once alone, she moved quickly to retrieve her clothing. Her green traveling dress was indeed dry, though badly wrinkled. She dressed as best she could without her usual toiletries, using her fingers to comb through her tangled hair. A glance at her reflection in a small shaving mirror revealed a woman she barely recognized, pale, with shadows beneath her eyes, her golden brown hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of neatly pinned. When Adam returned, she was seated at the table, feeling more composed but deeply aware of the impropriety of her situation. A young, unmarried woman alone with a bachelor in his remote cabin, it was the stuff of scandals back east. Yet here, with death by exposure the alternative, such concerns seemed trivial. "I cannot thank you enough for your help, Mr. Westfield," she said as he set a plate of bacon and beans before her. "You saved my life." He nodded once, a man clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "But it was your lantern I saw. If you hadn't hung it outside—" She didn't finish the thought, didn't need to. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed his features. "Always hang it on Christmas Eve," he said simply, turning away to serve his own plate. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Nora spoke again, feeling a need to explain herself. "I was coming to join my brother. He homesteaded near Pine Creek last year, sent for me to come teach school." She swallowed hard. "I received word at the last outpost that he died 2 months ago. Pneumonia." Adam's gaze lifted to meet hers, and for the first time she saw genuine emotion there, a flash of empathy quickly concealed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The station master said the town still needs a teacher, said I should come anyway." She managed a small smile. "I'm afraid I'm not making a very good first impression on Wyoming Territory." "Not your fault. December's a bad time to travel these parts." He hesitated, then added, "Your brother's claim, you know what happens to it." Nora shook her head. "The letter didn't say. I suppose I'll find out when I reach Pine Creek, if I reach Pine Creek." "You will," Adam assured her. "Storm will pass, always does." His certainty was comforting, though Nora couldn't help but wonder what would happen to her if her brother's claim had been forfeit. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey west, believing Thomas's letters about the opportunities awaiting her. Now with Thomas gone, she was truly alone, in a land far harsher than she had imagined. "Do you have family waiting for you somewhere, Mr. Westfield?" she asked, hoping to shift the conversation away from her predicament. His expression closed like a shutter. "No, no family." He stood abruptly, taking his empty plate to the wash basin. "Need to check the stock, make yourself comfortable." Nora watched him don his coat and hat and step out into the swirling snow, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the small pine tree in the corner, unadorned except for a silver star at its top. A Christmas tree, she realized with a pang. Yesterday had been Christmas Eve, which made today Christmas Day, and she was spending it stranded with a taciturn cowboy who clearly preferred his solitude. She rose from the table, determined not to wallow in self-pity. Her situation could be far worse. She could be frozen beneath a snowdrift. Instead, she was warm, fed, and sheltered, thanks to Adam Westfield's lantern and his reluctant hospitality. The least she could do was make herself useful. She set about washing the breakfast dishes, then tidied the main room. Her gaze kept returning to the bare Christmas tree, and an idea began to form. Perhaps there was a small way she could repay his kindness, after all. Adam leaned into the wind as he made his way back from the barn, his thoughts as turbulent as the weather. Having Nora Ramirez in his cabin had disturbed the careful equilibrium of his existence. It wasn't just the physical disruption of sharing his space, it was the way her presence seemed to illuminate the emptiness he had worked so hard to accept. He'd told himself for years that solitude was a choice, a necessity even. The truth, which he rarely admitted even to himself, was that it was a fortress he'd built against further loss. His parents, his sister, his home, all had been taken in a single night of violence when he was 16. He'd survived by chance out checking trap lines when the raiders came. he'd returned to find nothing but ashes and bodies. In the decade since, he'd rebuilt a life of sorts. His small ranch was profitable, his reputation as a horsebreaker earned him respect, and if people found him standoffish, well, that was their problem, not his. He'd convinced himself he preferred it this way, no attachments meant nothing to lose. But now this woman with her green eyes and gentle voice had followed his lantern to his door, and he found himself remembering things he'd tried to forget, the warmth of human connection, the simple pleasure of shared meals and conversation, the way his mother had made their cabin feel like a home, not just shelter. When he pushed open the cabin door, he stopped short, momentarily disoriented. The main room had been transformed. The small pine tree in the corner was no longer bare. It was adorned with what looked like paper snowflakes, carefully cut and hung from the branches. A garland of evergreen boughs now decorated the mantel, and the table had been set with his rarely used plates and cups, a centerpiece of pinecones and berries arranged in the middle. And there was Nora, standing beside the tree with an expression that mingled pride and uncertainty. She'd arranged her hair neatly, and though she wore the same green dress, she had somehow managed to press out the worst of the wrinkles. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Westfield," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind, I wanted to thank you somehow." Adam stood frozen in the doorway, snow melting from his boots onto the plank floor. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something for him without expectation of payment or return. The simple kindness of the gesture left him speechless. "I found paper in your desk drawer," she continued nervously, filling the silence, "and scissors, the greenery I gathered from what you had by the woodpile. I can take it all down if it's unwelcome." "No," he managed finally, closing the door behind him. "No, it's fine." The words were inadequate, but they were all he could muster. Relief crossed her features. "I've made coffee, and I found some dried apples that I stewed with cinnamon. It's not much of a Christmas dinner, but perhaps it will do until the storm passes." Adam removed his coat and hat, still struggling to process the change in his surroundings. It wasn't just the decorations, it was the feeling they evoked, memories of Christmases long past when his mother would transform their humble cabin with similar touches of beauty and care. "Thank you," he said, the words rough in his throat. "It's been a long time since." He didn't finish, didn't need to. Nora's expression softened with understanding. "For me as well," she said. "My parents died when I was 14. I've spent the last 8 Christmases in other people's homes as a governess. This is actually the first Christmas in many years where I've been able to decorate as I pleased, even in these circumstances." There it was, the connection he hadn't expected. Like him, she knew what it was to lose family, to navigate the world alone. Unlike him, she hadn't withdrawn from life. She'd continued to seek connection, to build something new. "It looks nice," he offered, the compliment unpracticed but sincere. Her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Come sit, the coffee is hot, and we might as well make the best of our Christmas, stranded as we are." Against his better judgment, Adam found himself doing as she asked, taking a seat at his own table that now felt transformed by her presence. As she poured coffee and served the stewed apples, he realized he was experiencing something he had believed lost to him forever, the simple joy of sharing Christmas with another person. The storm outside seemed to intensify, rattling the windows and howling down the chimney, but inside Adam's cabin something was changing, something neither of them could yet name but both could feel. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. One day stretched into 2, then 3. By the 4th day, Nora and Adam had fallen into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. He tended the livestock and kept the fires burning. She cooked and maintained the cabin. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, the initial awkwardness between them gradually easing into something resembling companionship. Adam remained a man of few words, but Nora discovered that when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and direct. He knew the land intimately, the habits of the wildlife, the moods of the weather, the rhythms of ranch life. When she expressed interest, he answered her questions without condescension, taking her curiosity seriously. On the 5th evening, as they sat before the fire drinking coffee, Nora found the courage to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind. "May I ask how long you've been alone out here, Mr. Westfield?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, staring into the flames, he said, 6 years on this land, 4 before that, working other men's ranches, driving cattle." "And before that," she prompted gently. His jaw tightened. "Before that, nothing worth talking about." She should have left it there, but perhaps the intimacy created by their isolation, or the way the firelight softened his usually guarded expression, made her press on. "I've told you my story," she said quietly. "Sometimes it helps to share the burden of memory." Adam set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. "Arapaho Raiders, I was 16. Came back from checking trap lines to find my family dead, our cabin burning." The words were clipped, factual, yet she could hear the pain beneath them. "Been on my own since." Nora felt her throat tighten with empathy. "I'm so sorry, Adam." It was the first time she'd used his given name, but the formality of Mr. Westfield seemed wrong for such a moment. He gave a slight nod but said nothing more. "My parents died in a carriage accident," she offered after a moment. "One moment they were there, the next, gone. My brother Thomas was already out west by then, seeking his fortune. I had no choice but to become a governess." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. 8 years in other people's homes, raising other people's children, always the outsider looking in. "That why you came west?" To stop being an outsider, his perception surprised her. "Partly," she admitted. "Thomas wrote that Pine Creek needed a teacher, said I could have my own little school, my own little house. Be my own person instead of an appendage to someone else's family." "And now?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. What now indeed, with Thomas gone and her future uncertain? "Now I don't know," she said honestly, "but I've come too far to turn back." Something in her words seemed to resonate with him. He studied her face with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You're braver than you look," he said finally. Coming from Adam, it felt like high praise. Nora smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Perhaps we both are," she replied. "Surviving isn't easy. Building a life alone is harder still." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away, back to the safety of the fire. But something had shifted between them, a door opened that neither had expected to find. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm finally spent. Nora stood at the window, watching the sun transform the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white, feeling an unexpected reluctance at the prospect of leaving. Adam entered from outside, stamping snow from his boots. "Trail to town should be passable by tomorrow," he announced. "Can take you to Pine Creek then." "Oh," Nora said, surprised by the hollowness she felt at his words. "That's good news." He hesitated, then added, "Unless you prefer to wait another day. Make sure the way is clear." Was that uncertainty she heard in his voice, a hint that perhaps he, too, was reluctant to see their unexpected companionship end? Perhaps that would be wiser, she agreed, too quickly. Another day of rest would do Penny good as well. He nodded, and she thought she saw relief flash briefly across his features before his expression returned to its usual reserve. They spent that day preparing for her departure, Adam checking her saddle and tack, Nora gathering her few possessions and helping to pack provisions for the journey. Yet there was a new awareness between them, a current of unspoken possibility that neither quite knew how to address. That evening, as they sat before the fire for what would likely be the last time, Nora found herself memorizing details, the way the firelight caught in his dark hair, the strong line of his profile, the careful gentleness of his hands as he carved a small wooden figure with his pocket knife. "What are you making?" she asked. He glanced up, almost embarrassed to be caught in the act of creation. "Nothing much, just habit." He held out the small wooden horse, perfectly proportioned despite its simplicity. "It's beautiful," she said, taking it from him. "You have a gift." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Passes the time in winter." Nora ran her finger over the smooth wooden back of the horse. Might I keep this, as a remembrance?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple request. For a moment he looked startled, then something softened in his eyes. "It's yours," he said. Then, after a pause, "Might be I could make more." "If you wanted." It was as close to an invitation as a man like Adam was likely to offer, a tentative suggestion that perhaps their paths need not diverge entirely once she reached Pine Creek. "I would like that very much," she replied softly. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with possibility rather than awkwardness. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming Territory, Nora felt a sense of hope, not just for survival, but for something more, something she had not dared to expect when she set out from Boston. Outside, the stars emerged in the clear sky, brilliant against the blackness. Inside, something equally bright was kindling between two people who had thought themselves destined for solitude. The journey to Pine Creek took most of the day. Adam led the way on his sturdy roan gelding, with Nora following on Penny. The snow-covered landscape stretched around them, pristine and silent except for the creak of saddle leather and the muffled thud of hooves. They didn't speak much as they rode, but the silence was companionable rather than strained. Occasionally, Adam would point out landmarks or offer practical advice about winter survival in Wyoming Territory. Nora listened attentively, storing away his words like treasures. As they crested a rise in early afternoon, the settlement of Pine Creek came into view below, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the distance. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance they could see people moving about their business. "There it is," Adam said, reining his horse to a stop, "Pine Creek." Nora halted beside him, studying what was to be her new home. It was smaller than she had imagined from Thomas's letters, more frontier outpost than proper town. The schoolhouse her brother had mentioned was likely one of those simple wooden structures. Her future students would be the children of farmers, ranchers, and shopkeepers, a far cry from the privileged Boston children she had taught as a governess. "It's not much," Adam said, misinterpreting her silence as disappointment. "It's perfect," she replied, and found that she meant it. After the isolation of Adam's ranch, Pine Creek looked alive with possibility. They rode down into town, attracting curious glances as they made their way along the main street. Nora was acutely aware of how they must appear, a young woman traveling alongside the man locals called the Silent Cowboy, both of them emerging from days of isolation during the blizzard. Adam directed them to a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Pine Creek Hotel and General Store. He dismounted and helped Nora down from her horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, neither moving away immediately. "Should be able to get information about your brother's claim here," he said, his voice low. "Owner knows everyone's business." Inside, the general store portion of the building occupied the ground floor, shelves stocked with dry goods, tools, fabric, and sundries. A pot-bellied stove in the center radiated welcome heat, around which several men had gathered, their conversation stopping abruptly as Nora and Adam entered. A portly man with mutton-chop whiskers moved forward from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be Adam Westfield in the flesh, and with a lady friend no less." His eyes twinkled with open curiosity, wondered if you'd been buried alive in that blizzard. Adam nodded stiffly. "Mr. Gordon, this is Miss Ramirez. She's Thomas Ramirez's sister, come to take the teaching position." Gordon's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "Ah, Miss Ramirez. We were mighty sorry to hear about Thomas. Fine young man, had real plans for this town." He extended his hand to her. "Oliver Gordon, at your service. Own this establishment and serve as mayor when nobody better is available." Nora shook his hand, grateful for the warm welcome. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Gordon. I was hoping someone might help me understand what's become of my brother's property and whether the teaching position is still available." "Both matters we can certainly address," Gordon assured her. "Thomas's cabin and claim are intact. He paid up his taxes before he passed. As for teaching, we've got 15 children in need of education and a schoolhouse just waiting for someone to put it to use." Relief washed over Nora. At least she had somewhere to go, something to do. "Where is my brother's cabin?" she asked. "Is it far?" Gordon exchanged a glance with Adam. "It's about 3 miles northwest of town. Decent place, but—" he hesitated. "But what?" Nora pressed. "Been empty these 2 months," Adam said quietly. "Winter's harsh. Cabin might not be in living condition right away." Gordon nodded in agreement. "Adam's right. You'll need time to get it proper for habitation. Wood chopped, supplies laid in, repairs made. Meanwhile, we've got rooms upstairs. You're welcome to stay until you're settled." Nora hadn't considered this complication. The thought of another disruption, another temporary lodging before she could truly begin her life here, was disheartening. "I can ride out and check the cabin," Adam offered unexpectedly. "See what Knight's doing." Gordon's eyebrows rose in surprise at this uncharacteristic offer of assistance from the taciturn rancher, but he nodded approvingly. "Good idea. Miss Ramirez can get acquainted with the town while you assess the situation." Nora looked at Adam, touched by his continued willingness to help her. "Thank you, that's very kind." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude, just practical. Know what to look for. As arrangements were made for Nora's stay at the hotel, she couldn't help noticing the speculative glances that passed between the locals who had gathered in the store. Word would spread quickly about her arrival with Adam Westfield, and in a small community like Pine Creek, speculation would be inevitable, yet she found she didn't mind. Whatever grew from the seed of connection planted during those snowbound days at Adam's ranch, she was grateful for it. He had saved her life, but more than that, he had shown her that even in the harshest environment, humanity and kindness could thrive. As Adam prepared to leave for Thomas's cabin, Nora walked with him to the door. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." His eyes met hers, and for once, he didn't look away. "Been thinking," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Town's not far from my place. Might be I could help with that cabin, getting it ready." The offer was more than a practical suggestion. It was an opening, a way for their paths to remain connected. "I would welcome the help," she replied softly, "and the company." Something like a smile touched his lips before he nodded and stepped outside. Nora watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode out of town, feeling as though something precious and fragile had begun to take shape between them, something neither had expected to find in the wilderness of Wyoming Territory. Thomas's cabin was indeed in poor condition. The roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow, and animals had made themselves at home in his absence. Adam spent the next week making it habitable, replacing roof beams, patching walls, clearing debris. Each day he rode into town to report his progress to Nora, their brief meetings becoming a rhythm both looked forward to. Meanwhile, Nora immersed herself in Pine Creek's community. She met her future pupils and their parents, explored the simple one-room schoolhouse, and began planning lessons. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, especially after learning how she had survived the blizzard. If there were whispers about her time alone with Adam Westfield, they were overshadowed by respect for her resilience. On a crisp January morning, Adam arrived at the hotel with news. "Cabin's ready," he announced. "Can move you in today if you'd like." Gordon, who had appointed himself Nora's unofficial guardian in town, frowned thoughtfully. "Proper enough for a lady?" he asked. "Clean, secure, got the stove working, chimney cleared." "Chopped enough wood for a month." Adam's clipped sentences conveyed the essentials without embellishment. Nora, who had come to understand that this was his way, heard what remained unsaid: the hours of labor, the careful attention to detail, the concern for her comfort that had guided his work. "I'm sure it's perfect," she said, smiling at him. "Shall we go this afternoon?" The small procession that made its way to Thomas's cabin that day included not only Nora and Adam, but also Oliver Gordon with a wagon of supplies, the minister and his wife, and several other townspeople bearing housewarming gifts. What might have been a simple move became a community event, a proper welcome. The transformation of the cabin took Nora's breath away. Adam had done far more than basic repairs. He had built new shelves, repaired furniture, even fashioned a small bookcase for the few volumes she had brought from Boston. A fire burned cheerfully in the clean stove, and the single room, though humble, was cozy and inviting. "It's wonderful," she told Adam, who stood awkwardly to one side as others exclaimed over his handiwork. "Far better than I could have hoped." He nodded, clearly pleased but uncomfortable with the attention. As the impromptu gathering continued inside, he slipped out to tend to the horses. Nora found him in the small lean-to that served as a stable. "You're leaving?" she asked, disappointment evident in her voice. He straightened from checking Penny's hooves. "Thought you might want time to settle in." "Meet your neighbors proper." "I've had a week of meeting neighbors," she said. "I'd rather thank the man who made this possible." Their eyes met in the dimness of the stable, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had grown since that snowy night when she had followed his lantern to his door. "Not much to thank," he said gruffly. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," she replied. "Most men would have done the minimum necessary, then gone their way." "You've gone far beyond that, Adam." He looked down, running a hand along Penny's neck. "Been thinking," he said after a moment. "My place is 15 miles from town, not so far. Might be I could check on you from time to time. Make sure you're managing all right." It was as close to a declaration of interest as his reserved nature would allow, and Nora recognized it as such. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "And perhaps, when the weather is fine, I might ride out to visit you as well, to to see how your Christmas tree is faring." The hint of a smile touched his lips, still standing. "Kept the decorations you made." This small confession, that he had preserved her paper snowflakes, the simple ornaments she had created during their days together, touched her deeply. It suggested that their time together had meant as much to him as it had to her. "Then I definitely must visit," she said, "to make sure it's properly tended." A call from the cabin interrupted them, Gordon announcing that the minister was about to say a blessing over Nora's new home. They walked back together, not touching but close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. As spring approached, Adam's visits to Nora's cabin became a regular occurrence. He would arrive with practical offerings, firewood, game he had hunted, repairs to her roof or porch, but stay for conversation and coffee. Gradually, the silent cowboy found his voice with her, sharing stories of his life on the frontier, his dreams for his ranch, even occasionally his memories of the family he had lost. Nora, for her part, thrived as Pine Creek's teacher. The schoolhouse filled with children eager to learn, and she discovered a joy in teaching freely, without the constraints of her former position as a governess. On weekends, she sometimes rode out to Adam's ranch, where they would spend quiet hours together, their comfort with each other growing with each visit. By summer, their courtship, for that was what it had become, though neither had formally acknowledged it, was the subject of approving gossip in Pine Creek. The silent cowboy and the schoolteacher made an unlikely but well-matched pair in the eyes of the community. On a warm August evening, Adam arrived at Nora's cabin with a small wooden box in his hands. They sat together on her porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "Made something for you," he said, offering her the box. Nora opened it to find a delicately carved wooden scene, a small cabin with a lantern hanging from its porch, a figure on horseback approaching through stylized snowdrifts. "Oh, Adam," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "It's beautiful." "Been thinking about that night," he said, his voice steady but soft. "How close you came to riding past. If I hadn't hung that lantern." "But you did," she reminded him, "and I followed it home." Home, the word hung between them, full of meaning. Adam's eyes, usually so guarded, were open to her now, revealing everything he felt but struggled to express. "That's what I wanted to ask you," he said, "if you might consider making it permanent, that home." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'd marry me, Nora." Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and warm as the lantern that had guided her through the blizzard. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." His smile, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious face, was answer enough, but he sealed his proposal by leaning forward to kiss her, gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. When they finally drew apart, Nora rested her forehead against his. "I never expected to find love in Wyoming Territory," she confessed. "I came for independence, for a fresh start." "Found both," he pointed out, "teaching. Your own place, your own life." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Doesn't have to change, just shared now." His understanding of what mattered to her, that she needed not just love but purpose, not just security but autonomy, confirmed what she already knew. This quiet, thoughtful man was her perfect match. "I love you, Adam Westfield," she said, the words easy and true. "Love you too," he replied, the declaration simple but profound, coming from a man who had believed himself destined for solitude. They were married in October, when the aspens turned gold and the first hint of winter touched the air. The ceremony took place in Pine Creek's small church, with the entire community in attendance. Oliver Gordon gave the bride away. Beaming with proprietary pride at the match, he claimed partial credit for facilitating. Nora wore a new dress of deep blue, ordered specially from Cheyenne, with her golden brown hair arranged in a crown of autumn flowers. Adam, almost unrecognizable in a new suit, stood tall and proud beside her, his customary reserve softened by happiness. They made their home at Adam's ranch, with Nora riding into town 3 days a week to continue teaching. The cabin that had once echoed with Adam's solitude gradually transformed, curtains at the windows, books on shelves, Nora's touch evident in 100 small ways. But perhaps the most significant change was in Adam himself, who found words coming more easily, laughter returning to his life, the fortress around his heart dismantled stone by Nora's patient love. When December came again, bringing with it the first heavy snow of winter, Adam hung the lantern on the porch without prompting. Nora, watching from the window, felt a wave of emotion at the sight. "In case someone needs finding," she asked as he returned inside, brushing snow from his coat. He smiled, drawing her into his arms. "Tradition now," he said. "Reminder of how I found what I wasn't looking for." Nora leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the uncertainty, the desperate ride through a blizzard that had seemed like the end but had proved to be a beginning. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't lit that lantern last Christmas Eve, if I had ridden past in the storm?" Adam was quiet for a moment, his arms tightening around her. "Don't like to think about it," he admitted finally. "Too easy to imagine you lost out there." "I think I was always meant to find you," she said softly. "The lantern just made it possible a little sooner." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Glad I lit it all the same." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the small pine tree in the corner, decorated now with both Nora's paper snowflakes and Adam's wooden carvings, stood as testament to the home they had built together. The silent cowboy was silent no more, and the woman who had followed a lantern through a blizzard had found far more than shelter. She had found love, purpose, and a place to truly belong. As Christmas approached once more, they prepared to welcome friends from town to celebrate, the isolation of the past replaced by a community of their own making. And each Christmas Eve thereafter, for all the years of their long and happy marriage, Adam Westfield hung a lantern on their porch, no longer a habit born of grief and memory, but a beacon of hope and gratitude for the night a stranger had followed the light to his door and found her way home.